We're separating people from the problem, so it's not, we're saying the problem, we're not saying what people do. Speak for yourself from your own experience, so please use I statements, not we all know that it's like this, because we don't. The thumb rule, you can use your Zoom reactions at the bottom of your screen. There's the thumbs up, there's clapping, there's the party emoji. Elmo, which is enough. Let's move on. If we're beating a dead horse, make space for everyone to speak and for ideas. And then there's always room for new ideas for our ground rules. If anybody sees anything that's missing, or you think that one of these should be tweaked, you can put it in the chat. You can speak now. You can put it on your feedback form.
Awesome.
Okay, Brianne, they're perfect.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, we're gonna keep going, but this list is all of ours. And so if you have any ways we can improve it, please let us know. So we're gonna jump right into things. We're gonna try a couple of different things today. We are going to have a couple of rounds of small group. I say partner here, but I think it'll probably end up being 2 to 3 people per breakout room, just with the numbers that we have. We're going to have a couple of rounds of small group sharing throughout our meeting. And we thought of this over the last few weeks as both a way for all of us to continue to get to know each other as we work together on the content for RVAgreen 2050, and also to maybe dive a little bit deeper on the topics that we're going to be talking about. So for this first round, I'm going to launch some breakout rooms. You're going to be in groups of 2 to 3. And in those rooms, today our big focus is equity, and particularly racial equity. We have talked about this a lot already, so hopefully you have a little bit of an understanding of what we mean by equity within this process. But what we want to do is have everybody for just a minute or so share a reflection or your understanding or any initial thoughts you have on how equity has come into either your work, your life, things that you've noticed here around Richmond, anything that you feel comfortable sharing. So I'm going to go ahead and create these groups. You're going to have 4 minutes total. So if you're in a group of 2, you can take 2 minutes each. And if you are in a group of 3, you can do the math. Jen and Alicia, do not go into your breakout room. I will figure out how to reassign. All right, have at it. All right, Jen, you're going to get a new breakout room and go to that one. That work?
Room 9?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Oh, okay, Fraser, room 5.
Brian, do you need me to join a room?
No, you're good. I just moved your partner. And then Rob, it looks like you're not fully signed on yet, but let me know if you're here and I'll assign you to a breakout room. Hey, how are you?
Hi. I'm sorry that I'm a little bit late. I work during the day, so sometimes I have meetings that run over.
Totally fine. I'm going to pop you into a breakout room right now. And we're just going to take a couple minutes to share, each person to share some reflections on equity.
Okay.
You should get a little notification.
Okay.
All right. Janine, I'm going to assign you to a breakout room. I don't know if you can see these. Hey, Hey, Rob, how are you?
Okay, there we go.
All right. So I have two of you for some reason. Do you want me to kick one of you off? Oh, there
Yeah.
you go. Never mind. Never mind.
Yeah.
All right.
My machine is mad at me.
It's probably
Yeah.
like, why are you attending a meeting on January
Well,
4th?
It might have something to do with that.
All right. Are you good if I pop you into breakout room for 1 minute with another group?
Sure.
Okay.
This is the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Just brief reflections on
Yep.
equity.
Brianne, thank you.
Sure. Yeah.
And I can just keep doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, the little box comes up and it just says later. If I hit later, it doesn't send me into the group. So
Yes, I just have to on my end manually shift people around, but it's not a big deal.
Okay, thank you very much. And hi, Kendra, how are you? I hope you had a great holiday.
Oh, hello. I'm good. It was fantastic. I hope the same for y'all as well.
Yeah, it was good. It was nice to have some time away.
Yep. As far as I know, I didn't get COVID, so I'm winning.
Uh-oh, I hope. Were you worried that you did?
I was in Tennessee, so I
Oh.
don't trust a red state when it comes to the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I will edit this out if you want. Sorry, I didn't stop recording.
Oh, sorry.
Hello world.
I'll go on record with it.
Yeah. All right. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts in your small groups.
All right, so I came in late, and hello everybody. And in our group, and you know me, I always, you're gonna know I'm here. Frazier was just about to say something, and I'm curious, Frazier, if you'd be willing to say it before we got cut off.
I will. I want to respect Brianne's process, though.
Go for it.
So, okay. I was just going to say, I think what is top of mind for me right now, after looking at the video for some reason, but also beginning to continually, I love that metaphor for asking question after question after question until you really get down to. And this is, again, top of mind for me because I'm participating in finding ways to present opportunities to a much broader group of people than I normally would. And it's an isolated situation, but I am much more conscious of, is the time of day right? Have I got it in the right places? Have I put it in a place that is accessible? I mean, all of those questions that I might not have asked before. And that seems very simplistic, but I love the idea of continuing to ask questions until you drill down to the systemic piece that caused whatever decisions to be made, the way they were.
Thank you so much, Fraser. That's great. I think we can actually stop the meeting if everybody, I'm just kidding. But yes, that is wonderful feedback. And I will share that my learning journey around equity has been very similar. It has taken me now almost 3 years to get to a point where I'm at least comfortable asking the questions. I don't always know what the answers are or what the right questions are to ask. But this is all a process, and we really appreciate you all being on this journey with us. So thank you so much, Fraser, for sharing. Did anybody else want to share anything? And if we're going to experiment with this small group sharing today. You can provide feedback at the end of the meeting on how you think it went, any thoughts that you have, all of that. But I'll leave it open for just a minute if anybody else wants to share. All right. Not seeing any, we're going to go ahead and get into a little bit of a recap from our last meeting. So I show this at every one of our meetings. Again, just a big picture of a reminder of where we are and why we're here. RVAgreen 2050 is the City of Richmond's Equitable Climate Action and Resilience Planning Initiative. We are looking at both climate action, or the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, which our goal is to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, as well as climate resilience or preparedness. And this is getting our community ready for the impacts that we are already seeing from climate change and that will be getting more intense as we move forward in the future. The ones that we are looking at most closely are things like extreme heat, more extended heat waves, more intense and more frequent precipitation, and flooding caused by that. And around all of this, we are using an equity-centered approach. So this is looking at how both our planning process to create RVAgreen 2050 as a deliverable can be more equitable, and how that plan deliverable can be equitable in itself. So we showed this slide last time, but we have made some changes since our last meeting. So we met on, like I've said before, the environment working group is typically going to be the first in our cycle of the 5 RVAgreen 2050 working groups. So we are experimenting a little bit with you all to see what works and what doesn't within our meetings. We heard your feedback from last time, and we acknowledge from our own internal feedback that what we tried to do last time by covering both the vision and the equity screening tool for RVAgreen 2050 was too much taking place within one meeting. And we really appreciate that feedback. Also, just generally feeling a little bit rushed related to some of the topics that we were covering. And what we want to do is make sure that we're setting a good foundation for moving forward in our process together, which beginning really in the next meeting or two will be creating content. So we want to make sure everyone's on the same page with where we're starting from, both in terms of the climate information as well as the equity information. So as I mentioned in my email from probably late December, we're going to be making a few changes moving forward. Relevant to today, this is why we're going to be revisiting the equity screening tool, because that activity in particular was really rushed at the end of our meeting, and we want to get more into that because you all will be using that tool. Moving forward, we will also extend our meeting time from 90 minutes to 2 hours. We will be taking a break within that 2-hour time frame, but as always, please feel free to get up, stretch, use the restroom, grab a snack, whatever you need to do within that time. We are going to be trying a couple other things to make sure that people are feeling like they're not falling behind in terms of the concepts that we're talking about. One of the things that we've discussed internally is offering some informal office hours. So if there's a topic that you or you individually, or maybe you and a couple of other working group members would like to discuss with members of our team or our co-chairs or other folks who are involved in our process, the format that I've brainstormed over the last couple of weeks at least is to have like a Google form that I'll send out where you can just sign up for a time slot. We'll try that out, but if that doesn't work, please feel free to provide feedback. And then any other sort of outlets or additional learning or discussion opportunities that you all would like, please feel free to propose ideas. We don't want to take more time than we're already asking of you, but definitely want to offer time as much as you need it. So those are kind of the smaller sort of logistical changes. And then broad overview, the major change we're going to be making that will impact our work moving forward is that instead of using this month and next month, January through February, to continue setting our foundation and then also draft strategies, we are going to be extending that time frame through March. So previously this said January through February. And then our community engagement was March through April. And what we're going to be doing is spending more time in our working groups and with our roundtable to create the content that goes out to the broader community in April. And then we'll be coming back still in the summer to take in that input and refine it. I think that is the bulk of the changes that we have discussed. Any questions, thoughts, feedback on any of that for right now?
I think I broke up just a tiny bit while you were saying that. Does that mean we are not going to be doing community engagement activities until when?
So, sort of. So originally what we were going to be doing was using all of March and April to do community-wide engagement on the draft strategy content that we develop in our working groups and the roundtable. What we're going to do instead is use March to continue having a couple additional meetings in our working groups to draft that content, incorporate feedback from the roundtable, anything else from other working groups, that sort of thing, and also use March to hold some community engagement activities, but they will be more like a foundation setting for April, which will be the input on the content. So for example, we will maybe have some educational opportunities for the community to participate in March around topics related to climate change, related to equity, the same things that we're discussing now, since there is such a broad learning curve across a lot of these concepts. And then that will better prepare the community to provide feedback on the draft strategies come April. Carlene, does that answer your question? That looked like a yes, so I'll take that as a yes. Any other questions for now? No? All right. Again, this is going to remain flexible. One of the things that we have learned along the way is that we need to maintain our flexibility, especially as we continue to uphold the principles to create an equitable planning process, and we appreciate everyone's participation along the way and your additional feedback. So at the last meeting, we did take some time to look at a draft vision statement for RVAgreen 2050 in breakout groups and provide some feedback on that draft. Just as a reminder, the draft vision statement came from a couple meetings of the Roundtable, which is a group of 13 residents of Richmond from various neighborhoods, some of whom are members of this working group. We looked at with them things coming from other cities, as far as examples of vision statements, as well as Richmond 300 and a couple of other kind of inputs to draft a vision statement with what we're calling guiding principles. This is the same draft that we showed you all last time, so we don't need to necessarily go through and read this. What we wanted to show you all today was a very high level list of the main points of feedback that we heard, not only from you all in this working group, but also the other working groups. And what we're doing internally in the Office of Sustainability is we're still working on incorporating that feedback and redrafting the language of the vision statement, which will go to the roundtable and then back to you all at a later meeting. So just broad picture here. One major point of feedback we heard was to simplify the vision statement, and we totally agree. There were also a couple of terms that were in the draft vision that need to be defined somehow. So we haven't landed on the best way to do this yet, but for example, if we were to simplify the vision statement, it could be just a simple one sentence, perhaps with maybe a glossary or some supporting principles underneath it, something like that, where things are defined in more detail. We also heard that folks would like to include a couple of things that weren't mentioned in the vision, such as other pollutants besides just carbon emissions, food justice as a community priority, and then also looking at not just the impacts and the focus on humans in terms of our equity-centered plan and process, but also incorporating animals, biodiversity, and ecosystems. So we know this list does not cover all the feedback that we got, but we just wanted to share that a lot of the feedback we got from the different working groups was pretty similar. What you can do if you would like is continue providing feedback to us via email or in the chat here. We'll take a couple minutes to review this. We will again get back to you all with the next revision of the vision statement by the next meeting, I think. But for now, any questions? We're not going to take a ton of time on this today, but any questions or pressing kind of feedback that you want to provide that you weren't able to voice at our last meeting?
I had something that I thought of after our meeting about, I guess, acknowledging RVA is like the gentrified Richmond in some way in this, and whether that be in the vision statement or just describing RVAgreen 2050 as a whole, because I think that kind of, and I think from the equity video that made me think of it more as like acknowledging some of the history with it. If we can't do it fully, at least bringing up the idea of, how we got from Richmond to RVA and what that means, like from a vision and mission level.
And I would even take it. Hi, Wafame, good to hear your voice. I think one of the challenges that we have as a city is how do we bind Richmond and RVA? And since we're out on the bleeding edge, potentially there's a way to acknowledge and hold that up, because that's going to be the leading issue over this next 5 to 10 year period is how do we move RVA forward and also hold the legacy and the place of those who have been Richmond for the last 50, 75 years. Nothing too difficult.
Yeah, got it. Thank you both. That's helpful. Any other thoughts for right now? No? Okay. Well, thank you all again for your input on this. This is not the last time you'll see this. This is not the last version that you will see. So we will come back to this at a later time. So that's it for kind of recap of our last meeting. Let's see. What we're going to be spending the rest of our time on today, sorry, I'm having trouble with my slides for some reason, is the equity tool. So just as a reminder, we're going to cover some of the information that we covered last time, but want to take time, obviously, to answer any questions that people have and take a little bit more time to have some discussions. Several of you have already mentioned the video that we shared from Desiree Williams-Raji of Capua Consulting. Just as some background on that, Desiree has been an equity coach for us as a sustainability office team for a few years now, through the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is a professional network that we belong to as an office. And she is just wonderful and a wealth of knowledge about equity issues, particularly as they relate to sustainability and climate. She previously worked for the city of either Seattle or Portland. I feel bad that I can't remember, within their sustainability office, and then really spearheaded their work on linking climate and equity. Thank you, Alicia, Portland. If you haven't yet, please do watch that video from her. It is about 40 minutes or so. It's a foundational training that was offered to the Urban Sustainability Directors Network members at our annual meeting a few months ago, and she has very generously provided it to us to give to you all as our working groups as some foundational kind of learning material. If we could spend 45 minutes on a Zoom and watch it together somehow logistically, I would do that, but please do it on your own, and then feel free to ask us any questions, follow up with any additional resources you think might be helpful. So today we're just gonna do some big picture review of where we were last time, or where we've been with equity so far. So again, just as a reminder of why equity, and particularly racial equity, is so important and why we are centering it in the RVAgreen 2050 planning process. Climate change affects some members of our community more than others, and this is based on a number of factors, many of which can be traced back to historical and existing institutional racist policies and programs right here in Richmond. And we see this manifested today in the fact that many of the inequities that cause people and neighborhoods to be more vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, like heat waves and like flooding, come down to race. So the map on the left is our climate equity index, which is a combination of 39 demographic, health, housing, and other factors that can potentially increase someone's vulnerability to climate change. Just as an example, if you have asthma, you are more susceptible to heat-related illness during a heat wave. If you do not have access to transportation such as a vehicle, you may be more vulnerable during an event like a flood if you needed to evacuate. And you can just see from these visuals that the maps of the more vulnerable areas of our city as far as climate change impacts look very similar to the maps of our communities of color, in particular our Black and African American and Hispanic and Latino communities. And so within RVAgreen 2050, we are using this framework, which I believe in her video, Desiree actually talked about something extremely similar to this. We are looking at equity in three ways. Procedural, we are incorporating and centering equity in the actual process to create RVAgreen 2050 as a plan, which is why we continue to talk about it at these meetings. We are looking at distributional equity, which will be something that the equity tool will help us do in evaluating how the plan itself or the strategies and actions that we come up with in our working groups affect our community in different ways, and looking at benefits and burdens of those strategies. And then the structural or institutional piece is the biggest one. This is not something that we are going to be able to solve with this climate action and resilience plan, but we do hope to chip away at it and leave a positive legacy for future planning processes to be more equitable. And I think Fraser actually brought up a great example of how just the involvement in this process has already started to spark some of those ideas, which can hopefully be integrated into other things happening across our community. And that's one of our goals for this process. Okay, so for some reason it keeps going back to this. All right, so what we're going to be talking about today is, so that's the why. Why are we talking about equity? And now we're going to talk about the how. How do we center equity within our process to create RVAgreen 2050 and the plan itself? One of the ways, one of the tools that can help us is an equity tool. This is something that other cities have used across the country to evaluate and create their climate action plans. And we have some examples that I'll share with you. The important thing to note here is that an equity tool is both a product, as in like a document that we can use as some sort of checklist or guiding framework for how we create content, but it's also a process. So just the process of us working together as working groups to create the equity tool will start to help us ingrain equity in the way that we think about climate change and its impacts and how to mitigate those impacts. So just a few examples we wanted to share with you all, which we've shared before, come from some cities. This one is from Cleveland. You'll see that many of the equity tools from these other cities are pretty similar in terms of their structure. They have a couple of or a few kind of main themes, and then under those themes are considerations or questions that the stakeholders involved in the process to either create or implement that city's climate action plan are charged with asking themselves and their groups to better sort of incorporate equity thinking into their processes. So for Cleveland, for example, they had 5 main themes or key questions, I guess. And then under each of those areas, they had some additional detail on what kinds of things they were looking for within those themes. We can share these documents so you don't have to try to read all of this. Sorry, I keep forgetting to do this. Another example is from San Antonio. They just came out with their climate action plan, I believe late last year sometime. And their equity tool is more of a checklist of tons of questions to go through. So you look at, one of their strategies. The idea is that you look at a strategy and then you go through these questions. Could this strategy reduce asthma-related hospital visits? And then the idea is that the stakeholders who are involved in the implementation of that plan would think about that question, respond to it, and then create recommendations, perhaps to change that strategy, perhaps to influence how it's implemented, something like that. And then the last example is from Portland, which is the simplest one. They had 9 equity considerations, and each one has maybe a question or 2 that the stakeholders involved in their process asked when they were reviewing the content of their climate action plan. And just as an example, when they looked through the climate action plan, using this equity tool, they created some new objectives as well as added specificity to how some of their actions were implemented. We went over this last time, so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but the way that we will be using the equity tool is actually in the creation of the content for RVAgreen 2050. So we will work together in our working groups to say, okay, we know that X is a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, some sort of policy, and this isn't for our group, but let's say encouraging adoption of electric vehicles among private residents. That can reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. Well, if we go through some of these questions, for example, in Portland's case, we might think about what that action could potentially generate in terms of burdens to communities of color or low-income populations, et cetera. So you would go through that exercise with each of your strategies. All right, so does anyone we're going to spend the rest of our time actually diving into creating the equity tool content. So happy to answer any questions about that, and also any questions that folks have just more generally on equity within RVAgreen 2050 before we break up into our next partner sharing activity.
Brianne, I'm curious if you can, because I know about these equity tools in other cities. Do you have like a case study that we could read through about where they've used it, and then there's an actual, like kind of, or at least maybe in a few different places, how that's been used, and actually ended up as something that then everybody agrees is like, oh, this is very successful?
Yes. The only example I have of that right now is the Portland one, which was like a short case study document, which we can share. We can also reach out to our peers in these other cities and say, how did this go for you? Now that you're actually using this. I think that would definitely be helpful, and we can share that information. Thanks, Sharon.
That would be super helpful from the perspective of like, just like seeing and maybe like lessons learned in like, after they've put this out there and maybe other people start to use it, what have they heard about to make it even better? That sort of stuff is always would be super helpful as our working group advances.
Perfect.
And then I was going to have a comment and reflection, as usual. But for those of us who are folks of color in the group, I was just struck by, this is usually our job, right? I mean, this is why white folks bring us into these groups, to be able to provide this perspective, right? Now, more detailed, et cetera, but this is for me, I'll speak for myself at this moment, having walked this walk for many years, having this as top of stack and top of mind takes it off of my shoulders entirely to be able to push and talk about how important this issue's, the view of equity is. Like, Black people walk into a movie theater and we look and it's like, oh, are there any Black people in the movie? Oh, what are they doing? Oh, the Black guy's gonna get killed first, right? I mean, this is how we move through the world all the time. And to have this level of scrutiny being brought to a high level, governmental process that we're bringing folks along into is just, now it ain't perfect, right? But it is so much of a step ahead. And I'm kind of echoing Mary from back in our last meeting, right? She said these aren't things that we even thought about because we didn't know to think about them, right? But now I'm telling you that I've been sitting in rooms for the last 20 years pointing at this stuff, saying, wait a minute, pay attention. So, on the one end, I'm speaking because I know that in some ways we're kind of on the bleeding edge, but on the other hand, we're not, because when we've been talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion for the last 20, 25 years, this is where we're trying to get to, whereas it's not on the shoulders of those of us who are of color or impacted or with lived experience in these places to be able to be posing these questions, that this is societal work. And so, it may be a little bit tough across the board as we're moving out beyond our own circles. But I just want to share that reflection because it feels good to me to not have this sitting on my shoulders only, and to be part of a group that's like, okay, this matters and you're not crazy. And when you raise your hand and you say, well, what about this? Right. So sorry about that, but show up late and you got stuff to say.
Thank you, Rob.
Can I ask a question?
Mm-hmm.
I'll assume yes. So the tool will be used to create the RVA Green 2050 plan, which will launch April 2022.
Mm-hmm.
Does the tool have a lifespan beyond that? And who uses it at that point?
Yes. So that is the goal. And traditionally, the examples that we've seen from other cities are showing that they create the tool at some point during their planning process, more geared towards implementation, actually. So the feedback that they're getting, at least from my reading of these three examples, the feedback that the stakeholders involved in creating the plans is incorporated into this additional kind of implementation tool that can guide, okay, we have this list of recommendations and strategies over this time frame to implement. As we are implementing X, Y, and Z, we need to consider these questions or key themes or something. Portland was probably the only example that I read, at least, where they used it to look at the plan itself and make changes. So I think that we are, as Rob said, kind of on a bleeding edge here, that we are creating the tool first, at least a draft of it, to use that to even start to develop content, with the idea being that the tool will be refined over our process and be adopted as part of RVAgreen 2050 itself to be carried into implementation. So we don't have that, we have really put down on paper or anything what that looks like in terms of implementation yet, but I think the idea is that this gets incorporated as part of the final product. Alicia, did you want to share anything? I saw you.
Yeah, thank you. And just to add on to what Brianne said is, I think going towards part of the institutional or systemic piece is, we are keenly aware that this planning process is, it's something we want to do, need to do, but also that it's going to take, quite a bit of time. So we're also working, right now to try and incorporate equity, racial equity, and these principles and tools into city processes and procedures as much as possible. And so, for example, things that are going on now with affordable housing planning, with health and equity planning. So we are, working, integrating this work through RVAgreen 2050 into other city processes and planning. So as you all, to Fraser's point and her work, that's one of the things that we hope this planning process will do. So please feel free to take what you're learning here, what you're seeing here, and as much as possible, carry it out into other work that you're doing with the city or in your own circles. And we're very much doing the same within the city.
Thanks, Alicia. Jen, does that answer your question?
That does. Thank you. I think that part of what something that's in the back of my mind is that the Portland case study looks like a paragraph, like a long sentence kind of question that you're asked when thinking about something. And I think there's a merit to the checklist format too, but I'm not sure when it's time to make the decision of what that tool looks like. But if you want others to use it, it might be worth trying to see what format would work best for other departments and organizations so that it's easily usable and not something that has too much jargon, or isn't a format that people would actually use.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point. And we'll be experimenting with using at least the draft that we come up with in our actual process. So hopefully we can get to creating something that is usable and used eventually. Great point. Okay, so unless there are any additional questions, we're going to jump into our second round of small group sharing. Now that we've talked a little bit more about the relationships, why we're talking about equity so much within RVAgreen 2050. And some of you have watched that video from Capital Consulting on the relationship between equity, historically in the United States, and so many things, including climate change and sustainability. Want to break you up into small groups again and ask you all to take just a couple of minutes each to share your understanding of equity as it relates to climate and environment. And again, this is just an opportunity for you all to continue to get to know each other and share your thoughts on what we are doing here. So any of our team members who do not want to go into a room, you can stay, and everybody else should be getting an invitation to join a small group. And you have 4 minutes. Okay. We have, okay, cool. Wendy. Wendy, oh, never mind. All right. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back. Hope your second round of small group sharing went well. Before we take a really quick break, does anybody want to share anything that your group talked about related to equity, climate, and the environment?
No, Jeremy, I'm not going to say anything.
I was with Rob and in our breakout, and so I'll say something really quickly. We talked about how I referenced that being able to discuss climate and to be able to have that as a part of our thing is kind of a privilege, but we also need to make sure that the general population knows that the climate is impacting daily lives for sometimes negative, and we also have to look at how the environment can be a positive piece to this too. So making that connection with our general population, and especially with folks who have not traditionally been able to think of that because there is more on their plate, is kind of what we need to be thinking about as we go through this process.
All right, so now I do get to talk, and we were sharing that this is a place where groundwork really steps in and feels. I mean, we've already been doing this work in terms of helping regular folks understand that this large conversation about environmental and climate, right, is actually showing up in their kids' lives, how they go to the hospital, whether they get to, all of these kinds of things, that it's of a piece. And so, Jeremy, I mean, the projects that we're going to be working on, and right, I mean, there are huge opportunities in our city to move this forward in ways that are accessible and are exemplar, I think. So I'll shut up again. Sorry.
Awesome.
I'd like to speak. Are you all saying that we have a huge educational job to educate folks about how you're not? Okay.
No, it's a little more complex than that, because people know a lot, right? They live their lives, they have experiences. It's to help them make the connections between their lived experience and this larger conversation that's happening among us technocrats and other folks in the world, right? I mean, as people are talking about green jobs and the greening of the city and all of these things, right, that can feel like a thing apart for many folks who've been impacted, right? And yet to help folks, because as soon as you start talking about educating people, you can begin to shift gears away from valuing the experiences that they've lived, right, and centering those, which is what this process is doing. Right, is it centers the process of lived experience and then helps people to navigate themselves into these larger places, right? Because otherwise you're doing this, right? I know this and you need to know that.
Yeah, no, I get your distinction, and it's a very good distinction.
Fraser, did you have a comment?
I just want to say thanks to Rob, because I had to jump off to take a quick call, but Justin and I talked about one of the things that I think the inequities that impact the communities of color and underserved communities. I did use the word education, inserting an education process into community engagement, where Rob, you said it much better. It is connecting the experience that they are living to, I think, something they don't even realize. And that's your distinction between, when you say education, you get people backing out of the room going, they're going to tell me something that I don't really want to know and I don't get. So I appreciate what your distinction. It's important.
I do too.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. This is great. So I do want to take a really quick break. Let's take 4 minutes. For those of you who don't know, and I share this because if we were in a room together, this would be extremely obvious. I'm about 6 months pregnant. So that means that I need to take breaks as well. So let's come back at 2:03 and we're going to jump into our equity screening tool activity. All right, awesome. Thank you all so much for coming back. We are going to spend the rest of our time talking about the equity screening tool. And before we jump into our activity, just a little bit more on what this actually is. So you all received, we sent via email, probably in the last couple of meeting reminders / updates, a Word document, which I also just put into the chat. Hopefully I did that right. But this has the full draft content of the RVAgreen 2050 equity screening tool, similar to the vision, the draft vision statement. This has gone through a couple of iterations, starting with, excuse me, 1 second, I have to sneeze.
Bless you.
Never mind, it went away. Thank you, Carleen, though. All right, so with the roundtable, we started with the examples that we just reviewed from the other cities of what they used in their climate action plans and processes. And then we just sort of let them have at it. We did something similar to what we're going to do today by looking at the community priorities of the Richmond community that we heard through our listening process that took place last summer, which I'll review with you all again, and came up with the draft content that you see in that document and that we will be looking at today. We did spend some time on this at our last meeting, but again, it was so rushed that we wanted to come back to this and really be able to dive into it so that you all have adequate time to provide your input, but also get a better understanding of what this tool might look like and how we might use it in our process. So the equity screening tool itself is a document. The goal is that it is not an extremely long document, so it will be shortened from what you see in the draft form today, but that it might take maybe 2 forms. One will be the full equity screening tool, which, Jen, to your question previously, this is probably what would be maybe adopted as part of RVAgreen 2050. You know, the list of community priorities and all of the considerations or questions that go into creating the draft content that we work on over the next few months. But then we were also thinking, because it's not that realistic to ask you all to go through a list of 70 questions every single time you come up with a draft strategy for RVAgreen 2050, to also have a companion document in the form of a quick decision guide or something like that. And this would be some condensed questions to help to still maintain that process, that way of thinking of ingraining equity in how we are drafting strategies, but you're not necessarily going through a checklist of 70 points line by line for every single strategy. We just don't have the time to be able to do that. So in addition to those 2 documents, again, as I mentioned before, the equity screening tool is also a process. This is a process to create the tool, to experiment with it as we draft content, and to start embedding this equity thinking in our brains as we develop climate action and resilience strategies. So these are the 7 community priorities that we've reviewed before, but just as a reminder, last summer when we launched the community engagement for RVAgreen 2050, and this took place from around April to maybe late summer, and this was primarily through the work of our team member, our community engagement coordinator, Kendra Norell, conducted a series of listening sessions and supplemental research into what Richmonders, and particularly those who are living on the front lines of climate change, or who serve the communities that are on the front lines of climate change, want to see in terms of priorities not related to climate, just generally. And so what we heard and what we saw from existing community-based, surveys and plans and things that had come out were these 7 sort of themes. We're going to be diving into each one today, but these are the themes that will guide sort of form the framework of the racial equity, the equity screening tool itself. So racial equity and environmental justice hopefully speaks for itself now that we've been talking about this a lot over the last few meetings. This is just making sure that we are looking at the historical and institutional factors that go into why climate is affecting different communities in different ways. Engagement and communication was centered around how the community or how different communities are engaged in planning processes and the way that those opportunities and information and related initiatives are communicated. Government accountability is related to just really follow through on the part of not only city government, but also maybe institutions and other actors that are active in these communities. So doing things like following up once we've heard something to make sure we heard it correctly, coming back to communities after things have been implemented or decided on to make sure that they are involved throughout the process. So those three are more procedural in nature, I guess. And then the four more topical community priorities are community wealth, which relates to jobs, sustainable and living wages, education. Housing and buildings is really just affordable housing. And we know this is a real priority across the whole city. Neighborhoods covers several things, but really came down to people wanting to live in beautiful and safe neighborhoods. So this relates to how our communities look. We heard things about litter, about green space, about transportation access, but also public safety, safety related to transportation and other topics. And then health and well-being is just that. It covers not only physical health and well-being, but also mental health and well-being. So these 7 community priorities form the framework again for our equity screening tool. And the way that the screening tool is divided is into 7 key questions or areas based on these priorities. And then underneath each of these 7 main questions for right now is a list of additional draft questions or considerations to consider as we develop climate action and resilience strategies. So I have to sneeze again, but I was thinking it's going to go away. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is actually walk us through one of these sections. Our activity today is going to be splitting up into breakout groups like we tried to do last time, but with actual time to have some discussion about the different sections. We're going to talk about the racial equity and environmental justice section of the equity screening tool together as a full group, and then we're going to break out into 3 groups. Each of the 3 groups will consider 2 of the remaining 6 sections, and I'll go through in detail what the activity is. If you'd like, you can go to the Google Slides for the activity, which I just put into the chat, but I'm going to keep sharing my screen for right now so I can walk through this with everybody. So for our breakout activity, what we're going to do is provide a minute or 2 for you all to take a look at the draft content for the section that you are reviewing. Again, we've sent this to you before, but you might need a reminder. Might be the first time you're looking at it, hopefully not. Just to start to get a handle on what that section of the equity tool entails in terms of subject matter, and also what kinds of questions the roundtable came up with as they were brainstorming what this, how to prioritize equity as it relates to that topic. The actual activity that we're going to be using is the same as last time. If you are able to, you can go to the Google Slides and drag one of the symbols, any of the symbols that are on the right-hand side of the slide over here. Drag a star over to a sentence if you like it. The question mark is there so that if you don't understand what one of the questions or considerations means, we want to know that. To Jen's point, we want to make sure that this is actually usable. And then yep, go ahead, Rob.
Sorry, it might be useful, and I know that we don't have a bucket of time, but if you could show people how that actually we had some
Oh yeah,
difficulty in some of the group in terms of how do you do that?
Yeah.
Right. So I mean,
Let
if you
me-
could.
I'll share.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to share the Google slide on my screen instead of the PowerPoint. And if you have trouble, we have solutions for that. So hold tight. All right. So these are the same Google slides that the link that I just put in the chat. So this first section is what we're going to be looking at together. So again, all you need to do, if you're able to access this, and if you're not, just hold on, we can provide some assistance with that. But you would click on one of these little symbols and then just drag it like, okay, I like this question. This is something that I think we should be asking when we think about how racial equity and environmental justice can be incorporated more into our climate planning. Similar to the question mark and the X symbol. What you can also do is you should be able to see at the bottom of the slide a section for slide notes, and there are bulleted lists, or we started a bulleted list for additional feedback. You can type as someone is doing right now. The anonymous rhino is providing some feedback here, which is great. You can also provide feedback directly in the Zoom chat if you're not able to use the Google Slides to interact with. We know that not everyone has that capability depending on what type of device you're using. And then if all else fails, you can just verbalize your feedback and ask someone within your breakout group or me right now to write down your input. Or you can scribble it down on a piece of paper right now or start drafting an email to me. Send it to me, just get it to me however you want, and we will incorporate it into the draft content. Are there any questions about the functionality of the activity itself?
Brianne, this is a different link than we had last time or that was sent out before, right? I just had the other sheets open and I noticed when you were moving it around, it wasn't moving. So this is a new sheet and there's two different versions, right?
Then I just sent out 5
what
minutes
you
ago.
sent out now is not the one that went out in the email for the meeting, right?
If not, then that was my error. Please use this one. So
Okay.
Please use the link in the chat. If I sent the one possibly from the last meeting, it's the same content. It's all the same. So if it ends up there, that's totally fine too, but use the link in the chat. So sorry about that. Thanks, Todd.
Okay, thanks.
And if you start to like mess things up, we've done this internally and we have folks who are making stars into squares that cover the whole screen. That's okay too. Just holler and we'll fix it. So and if folks have ideas for how we can be a little bit more interactive in these meetings, not using Google Slides or using some other tools, please put that in like a feedback survey or anything like that. Any other questions on the technical side of this activity? No, it looks like folks are already moving some stars around, which is great. So what we're going to be doing in our discussion groups is thinking about related to the topic that you're looking at. So for this one, we're looking at racial equity and environmental justice. What kinds of questions can we ask ourselves? And do we want future stakeholders who are implementing RVAgreen 2050, who are thinking about how to improve it, who are looking at it from a community perspective, what kinds of considerations do we want them to use to determine whether something that we've drafted for the plan prioritizes equity as it relates to this topic, racial equity and environmental justice. So this one's pretty broad because it's equity, prioritizing racial equity and environmental justice. But as you'll see, the other topics for our group today are things like housing, jobs and wages, and some more sort of concrete topics to think about. So one thing that might be helpful is to think about an example of the kind of strategy we could see ourselves drafting in this process. In the slides that I'll share afterwards, not these ones, I pulled a strategy that is coming from Richmond 300, our newly adopted master plan that says something like continue funding tree planting programs and educational initiatives, something like that, something general. So let's say that fast forward to our meeting in mid-February or something. We know that trees can help to reduce the urban heat island effect. They can help to absorb carbon dioxide emissions. They have a number of other health and economic and other benefits. And we say, okay, we want to think about funding programs to plant trees in the city of Richmond. That's pretty general. So what sorts of things would we want to think about to make that strategy not only more specific, but more equitable as it relates to how it might impact the community, who could benefit and who could burden from a strategy like that? There are a number of other examples that we could use, but tree planting just came to mind for this group in particular. So what we'll do for each round of this activity, again, is to allow folks to digest and read the content for a minute or so to yourselves. And then we're just going to open it up for about 10 minutes for each round for folks to start talking about, oh, well, this question, I don't know what this means. Or, this one on, let's see, ways to reduce historical or current disparities. Well, what about this other thing that might be part of that? Just to sort of bounce ideas off of each other. So that's the idea behind this activity. As you all are reviewing the draft content for this section on slide 2 for racial equity and environmental justice, I know we already have some feedback being added in the slide, but does anybody want to share any thoughts or questions related to this section of the draft equity screening tool? And if we just use this as quiet work time, that is fine too. We're just here to support each other in having these discussions.
Brianne, how much time?
So we'll take another 5 minutes on this section, and then we're going to break up into 3 groups and have 15 minutes for each additional section, and I'm going to be providing time reminders for everybody. These slides will also, I'll share this link in the email afterwards for anybody who wants to provide additional feedback. We don't have time for everyone to look at every single section today. So if there was one that you were really dying to get to, you'll be able to do that afterwards. So right now we'll just take another 4-ish minutes or so to look at this. And like I said, both here in the big group and in our breakout groups, just feel free to voice any questions or ideas that you want to share with the group. Looks like someone was able to turn a star into a hexagon, which is pretty impressive.
To be clear, you only want to do that first slide, not any.
Carlene, I believe that was you, and you were a little delayed, so I didn't catch that. You might want to put it in the chat. I'm having trouble hearing you.
No worries. I was saying just to be clear, you only want to do that first.
There's probably a delay on the voice side of things, but to your question, just to be clear, you want that to be just the first slide, not all of them, correct? Yes, so right now we're just looking at slide number 2 of that deck that I shared. And then in the breakout groups that we're about to go into, you'll be directed to some of the other slides. So we're going to take maybe another minute or so if you want to wrap up any thoughts that you're having on the racial equity and environmental justice section. And I'm going to start getting our breakout rooms ready.
Brianne, I have a
Yes.
question. Is there a spot in this tool where folks will list existing conditions or like a description of what the project is trying to address?
Good question.
Because I'm thinking about like with tree planting projects, for example, is the goal, there could be multiple goals, and depending on how you approach the end outcome of the project, you know, like the goal could be to reduce stormwater runoff as opposed to sequestering carbon dioxide, because the species you would look for might be different if, you know, between those two goals.
Yeah, and I think that's a great question. And I think what, when we were working with the roundtable on this, and any roundtable members who are on are welcome to correct me or contribute, but I think we sort of talked about that within each of the 7 priorities, within each section, there would be some questions that prompt you to think about existing conditions as it relates to that priority. So like for the first one, racial equity, existing conditions as it relates to tree planting or whatever. So then you would think about that for like affordable housing. How do tree plantings programs relate to that? But I think, Wyatt, to your question, what I just created at the end of these slides is an overall feedback slide, and any additional feedback can go there. What we might also, you know, one thing we could incorporate into the equity screening tool, especially into something like the quick guide version, is here's some top of the line questions to think about as it relates to all of the categories, not just one specific area or something. Does that help? I know it's not an answer, but does that help?
Yeah, it definitely helps.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll put a comment in the last slide that I made relevant to that comment.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we go into our breakout groups? And I'm going to provide some more instruction before we go into that.
I have a question, Brianne.
Hey, yeah.
This is John. This might be kind of not helpful because it would be require too much change, or I don't know, but I'll just mention it. I noticed that all these questions are yes, no questions, like they're just binary, like does this do this, does this do this? And perhaps that's the intent, since it's kind of like a checklist, but I mean, would there be any merit to making them like open-ended questions so that when people are going through the checklist, they actually have to think like about what the action is doing specifically to address that question, as opposed to just being able to say like, yes, it does, or no, it doesn't. I mean, I feel like a lot of these issues often involve a lot of gray area.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nuance to it. And I don't know if having like binary questions is going to be able to, you know, resolve those nuances.
Great. John, I think that's a great point. I saw at least one thumbs up from one of the other working group members. So I put that in the overall feedback slide as well. And I think that this can take the form that is going to be most useful for our process, especially given that this is the first time something like this is being used that I know of, and definitely for our office, obviously, within a planning process. And there is so much to sort of dig into as far as things like the existing conditions, like all of the factors that affect all of these things, that having some more open-ended thinking and discussion might be useful, so that we can incorporate more of that lived experience piece. So I think that's a great point, and you should feel free as you think about what might be good open-ended questions to put those in the sections if you think of any specific ones. Thanks, John.
Yeah, and cool. That's a great response. I mean, a lot of these are awesome questions as they are, and to make them open-ended, you would just put the word like how in front of, like, you know, how does the proposed action generate burdens? And that just kind of entails the question asker. It's like, I'm gonna arrive at like a greater level of detail and thought.
Yeah,
exactly.
But cool. Yeah.
Any other points of overall feedback or technical questions at this point before we break out into groups? All right. So if you do have any questions that come up, please feel free to put them in the chat to me. What we're going to do now is break up into 3 breakout rooms. I think that will mean we have maybe 5 people or so per room. What we're going to do is take each breakout room, we'll take 2 of our sections that are in the equity tool to do exactly what we just did as a group on the first one on racial equity and environmental justice. So I'm going to do this randomly as far as the assignments this time, just to make it easier. But if there is one that you were really dying to get into, please let me know either in the chat or you can just vocalize it. The other sections that we have are all listed in the same set of Google Slides that I sent in that are in the link. And we have a government. And so the way that we're going to split up, let me get my agenda, is, okay, I'm going to stop sharing. We will have one group with Rob, and Rob's group will be looking at engagement and communication and government accountability. So those are the second and third topics. Then we will have a group with Jen, which will be looking at community wealth and housing and buildings. And then a third group with me, and we will be looking at neighborhoods and health and well-being. We will do this until about 2:45. So we have about 15 minutes. What I would suggest is taking some time in the beginning to review the content that you are looking at for your breakout rooms, and then you can just start having at it just like we just did, and conversation as it is helpful. So any questions before we break up? And I'll do a reminder before the rooms actually get created. Okay, so just switching folks around. All right, so again, if you end up in the room with Rob, which is room number 1, you'll be looking at engagement and communication and government accountability. If you end up in room 2 with Jen, you will be looking at community wealth and housing and buildings. And then if you're in room 3, I'll be in there in just a minute, and we're going to be looking at neighborhoods and health and well-being. So I will open the rooms. Please let me know if you have any questions. And I'll also provide time reminders, but we have until about 2:45 for this activity. All right, Rob, just making sure you're good. There we go.
I'm good. Thanks, Brian.
Yep, sure. All right. Hey, breakout room number 3. I'm going to be doing a little bit of double duty here, but I'm here to help however I can. So as a reminder, we are going to be looking at the topics of neighborhoods and health and well-being within the same Google Slides that I sent earlier. I just put the link in the chat again. So these are slides 12 and 14. I'm going to give everybody, a minute or so to just look through the content. These topics kind of go together in terms of relating to community kind of well-being, public safety, a number of other crossover topics. So please feel free to ask any questions and start talking when you're ready.
you want us talking or putting stars on things now?
Arlene, I think I caught that. I think the more important thing for, yeah, no worries. The more important thing for you all to be doing is focusing on the slides, the content, and providing your feedback. If it helps to have discussions, that's what we're here for. But if not, that's totally fine.
One thing that's popping out to me with the neighborhood section, I guess when I think of a neighborhood, I think of like, it's to me that concept is so much predicated on like people to people relationships and you know what it means to be a neighbor to another person. And I feel like a lot of the questions in that section are addressing more kind of like material needs, which is awesome. I think that is very necessary to creating like more intangible kind of outcomes. But like the only place that I see a question addressing kind of like what does it mean to be a neighbor and like how are our actions kind of facilitating that is this like the third to last, like does this support connections and accessibility within neighborhoods or between neighborhoods, and then you include socially in the parentheses. So I'm just wondering if anyone else like read through these and was kind of like, this is awesome, it's very material and very structural and tangible, but it's also doesn't necessarily touch on like how our actions are kind of fostering a collective sense of like peoplehood and humanity, you know, in our neighborhoods, which I feel like is to me kind of what makes a neighborhood a neighborhood.
I think that that's a really solid point, but in my personal experience, I've lived in a lot of these neighborhoods that don't have these kind of amenities. That sense of community, that sense of being a good neighbor to each other, that's not lacking. It's still there. It just might not look like what it looks like behind a gated community. And oftentimes it's about meeting each other's immediate needs. It's about, you know, when I was a single mom, I had a next door neighbor who was a middle-aged gentleman very close to retirement. And anytime it would snow before I had a chance to get out there to shovel my walkway, he came out and did it for me just because he didn't feel like I should have to do that for myself. In my experience, it's not a lack of wanting to be genuinely neighborly with each other. It's a lack of like, okay, so if I'm going to go for a walk with my neighbor, we've just got to walk with like heroin needles on the ground. That's kind of not so cool, you know? I think that you have a solid point that neighborhoods are about so much more than the tangible items that are within it. But I would argue that Richmond is not lacking for a sense of community, even in these neighborhoods that might be lacking for resources. So it's one thing that Richmond's actually really, really good at.
I think another point I might add that it's maybe a little bit from personal experience, but and no offense to those of you here who work with the city or work for the city, I should say, but sometimes the material side is the easier thing to put price tags on and show the benefits of or the costs of, and sometimes, unfortunately, that social aspect is it is hard to put a number on that. So to show that the benefits of something, it's easier when you can say, hey, this green space is collecting this much carbon, filtering this much water, reducing crime rates. You can put numbers on those material things a little more easily, I feel, at this point than some of the social or cultural things.
And I thought, oh, there she is.
Hey, sorry, I just got your text. Okay, let me, I was wondering what happened, Rob. Okay, I'm gonna put you in room number 1.
Yes, that would be good.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Alicia.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm just gonna make sure Rob, okay, looks like he's good.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
We're putting that off on corporations to get to do that. And I think that's an area we're definitely lacking.
So sorry I had to jump out. I just want to make sure that in our remaining few minutes that we have, that folks are also looking at the health section, but I really appreciated the comments that I heard about the neighborhood section. And it's really interesting how that ended up, I mean, that John, what you noticed, as I read back through this, I was like, oh, right, like people are in neighborhoods too. I think, Carlene, to your point and to both of y'all's points, I would think about this, especially in neighborhoods that are facing gentrification, as being something really important to think about, so that, as these economic and other factors continue to influence our neighborhoods, that we try to foster as much of that. John, I liked your peoplehood. I like that word. But that could be something to think about in I think it probably varies by neighborhood to what degree we should be thinking about that. Anyway, that's all I say. I took some notes on what y'all are talking about, so thank you. But we have about 4 minutes left, so sort of make sure folks are looking at the health and well-being section as well.
I know I just spoke, but I'm going to do it again because I've been waiting for us to get to the health and wellness. I noticed that it was starred on here, but I don't know exactly how I'd like to see it necessarily reworded, but that star on could this increase safety and security, and I think it misses a really important part from a racial equity perspective of, yes, we want to decrease crime without promoting the school to prison pipeline, without promoting, the mass incarceration of people who live in these neighborhoods. We want to decrease crime by addressing the sources, which I think they're trying to get at, but it needs to not just in a way that it's like addressing sources, but not further contributing to a really significant problem.
Yeah, and that one, Carlene, if you remember from our roundtable discussion, and I don't know, we did this group activity too, but that was one that the group that I was in at least had some trouble with, like what's the right way to talk about this by talking about the problem rather than the people. I think that was where something like that came up. And this report that I linked to from the Commonwealth's Attorney's Office, I thought was really helpful, not only because it comes from a city source, but because it talks about how all of these underlying factors really contribute to what we're seeing. So, but definitely point taken, and I put a note in the feedback as far as that. All right, so we have about 2 minutes left. I am going to jump out unless y'all have any last questions before we wrap up. No, okay. Bryce, while I have you, can you remind me what your daughter's name is? It was so beautiful and I couldn't remember it. I was trying to remember it for my husband.
Windsor Juniper is her name.
Awesome, thanks. We're trying to come up with, we're having a boy and I was trying to come up with like a nature name that isn't like Leaf or something. And so we'll see what that is.
Yeah.
All right.
My daughter's name is Arbor, and she had a playmate when she was a baby who was a little boy named Cedar. So just
that's so cute. Yeah. Right now, because my last name is Fisher, we were thinking Forrest. I was like, oh, Forrest Fisher, that could be like a law firm or something. Anyway. All right, I'll see y'all in just a minute. Thank you. All right, welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, as you're coming back in. Thank you so much for all of your feedback on the equity screening tool. And I hope that providing some additional time to have those discussions was helpful since we were so rushed at our last meeting on this. As I mentioned in the beginning of our activity, we're going to be sharing the same link with you all so you can revisit the sections that you discussed today or visit some of the other sections that you didn't get to. One thing I do want to note is that at the end of the Google Slides, one thing that came out of the group I was in was having a place for sort of more general feedback. So we added a new slide 15 that has a couple of points there. Folks are welcome to add to that if you'd like for any input on the equity screening tool overall. So what I want to do now is fast forward to our last round of partner sharing, which is going to be on this equity screening tool. We're going to be coming back to this so you all can continue to digest and reflect on this content. But for right now, we're going to do a really quick small group activity. And let me share my, well, I'll just put this question in the chat. We are going to be reflecting in small groups on how you see this equity screening tool impacting the work or topics of this working group. So I'm going to go ahead and open the rooms and you will have about 3 minutes. And any members of my team are welcome to not join. Hey, John, we're just doing our last round of quick small group reflection. All right, welcome back, everybody. Thank you for participating in our last round of small group reflection time. Hopefully you have enjoyed these quick sort of sharing sessions. If not, please let us know in the feedback survey that I will share in just a minute. To wrap up, just want to talk about where we're headed. Again, this is not the last time that you will have to reflect on or provide input on the equity screening tool, but we want to make sure to hit some of these points before our meeting time ends today. So today we are here, we are refining the equity tool. At our next meeting, we will be looking at the climate vulnerability and risk assessment. So starting to get into the actual topic of climate change, how it is impacting Richmond, and starting to think about how we can mitigate some of those impacts. And then for the next several meetings, we will be working together to draft strategies to not only help our community become more resilient to the impacts of climate change, but helping to mitigate the causes of climate change in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. We will be using a couple of frameworks that we've shared before, and we will share again. One is the idea of this nexus that we are working at the intersection of equity, climate action, and climate resilience. And then the sort of strategic framework that we'll be using is SMARTY, which is looking at how we actually draft these strategies. And the equity screening tool will come into this process as well. Again, we will get more into this in our next couple of meetings. For now, just want to review our next steps and homework. If you haven't already, please do watch the video from Desiree Williams-Raji of Capwa Consulting. I will share the link again along with the video password. And if you have not already, again, please just watch it. You will also have time to review the equity screening tool, any sections that you didn't get to today or would like to revisit from today. For right now, with our last couple of minutes remaining, please fill out our feedback survey that I just put in the chat. Let us know what you thought of today's meeting, what you think of the changes that we're making to allow for more discussion time, the types of activities that we're doing. And then coming up, our next meeting will be, getting a little bit of feedback. Our next meeting will be towards the end of this month, where again, we'll be looking at the climate vulnerability and risk assessment. And if we have time, beginning to draft strategies for the climate action and resilience plan. So we have a couple of minutes left. If folks would like to stay on and complete the feedback survey, please do so. If you want to hop off and do the survey on your own, then do that as well. Thank you so much for sticking around for these 2 hours. And I'm going to be here if folks want to share any reflections on the equity tool or other points of feedback about today's meeting. So thank you all if you're heading out.
Can you stick the link and the password in the chat?
Yes, of the video. Yes, hold on one second.
Oh, that's good.
And just so you know, for everybody, I just started it, and I wrote in an official capacity 2021, and I think this is going to be the first year that I will never forget what the year is when it changed. Just saying.
Agreed. All right, link to the videos in the chat with the password, and I will also send it out to the group. All right. Sounds like you all are doing the survey, but let me know if you have any feedback. Otherwise, thank you again, and we will see you in a few weeks' time. Happy 2021. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rob.
Good job, Brianne.
Thanks, Jen.
Very good job.